Two preliminary remarks. One, I had the honor of meeting Rabbi Sachs on separate occasions, and I invited him here to Bar-Ilan in 2003 when I was the head of the program for a religious and secular dialogue in the university. He delivered a lecture, amazing lecture, and spoke with the students. And for many of them, it was one of the most important events in their academic life at Bar-Ilan. Later on, we continued writing, and then he invited me to visit him at home, and I came and I visited him, and he gave me then his Agadah Shel Pesach, in which I'll read some sentences later on. And even we thought to write a book together, but unfortunately, it didn't came out. This is one. The second thing is, in the last 15 years, the translations of Rabbi Sachs' books into Hebrew became a great hit in the religious Zionist community in Israel, especially within the religious Zionist community in Israel. Well, after what we have now from Dr. Schwartz, and for somebody who reads or knows the writing of Rabbi Sachs and some of his speeches as well, then it's not a very understandable thing. Because the gap between Rabbi Sachs and what happened to religious Zionism in Israel in the last 25 years is quite big. Religious Zionism became more nationalistic. Rabbi Sachs is very pluralistic, much more Democrat. And his vision of Israel, which is profoundly Zionist and religious Zionist, is closer to the religious Zionism of 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, not the religious Zionism of today. So many times I ask myself, what happened? So the answer is that for me, it is so interesting, it's so relevant for individuals and for people, religious people, that people tend to disregard what he has to say about politics or the future of Israel or things like that. Okay, I start with that because Rabbi Sachs is the most influential religious rabbi, maybe not only rabbi, religious person in the Western world in the last 30 years. Undoubtedly. I can't think of anybody else who influenced not only Jews, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, but non-Jews, as a spiritual leader, figure, inspiration, as Rabbi Sachs. Certainly in England, where he had regular radio programs and some television shows, but also in other places. We, as an Orthodox Jew, don't have today, and didn't have in the last 20, 30 years, figures who are so important. And the vacuum that is left after his passed away so early at 72 years, I don't see anybody else who can fulfill it. So for me, personally, his absence is quite tragic. Okay, I want to focus now, after saying that, I want to focus on one key issue in Rabbi Sachs' thought that is relevant from the beginning of his writing till the last books, and is one of the most, maybe the most important issue in Jewish political tradition, and one of the most important issue in Western political tradition, especially current Western political tradition. And the issue is how you can combine, if you want to combine, between universalism and individualism at one hand, and collectivism and particularism on the other. Because individualism is quite different. Sometimes it really contradicts collectivism. When you are with collective identity, your individuality is only part of the collective, if you go to the extreme. If you go to the extreme of individualism, so the uniqueness of yourself is by being individual. The same about universalism and particularism. Universalism includes everybody in the world, and particularism makes differences between separate nations, religions, communities. So can you combine both individualism and universalism from one end, and collectivism and particularism for the other? Rabbi Sachs, that's answer in the affirmative. And it's very important in his worldview. One. Second thing is that usually in our life, always, in the most important issue, it's not either or. I see myself as a religious person. You see, a black young guy, I learned in Shemot Haredi. I was Haredi till I was 30. I'm religious Zionist in the last 30 years. I was very different as a Haredi. I'm very different as a religious Zionist. And when I see myself, I know, as so many people, that I'm both religious and secular. In our life, usually it's not either or. It's both things. And the question then is, how much of both things? Whether you are more liberal or more Zionist, more Democrat or more elitist, more universalistic or more particularistic. The issue is what is more, but not either or. We present ourselves as something free from other influences, but it's not the case. And the uniqueness of Rabbi Sachs is, and he is really rare and very important, that he goes in the road toward combining Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, with liberal democracy, but from a particularistic point of view. That is more than universalistic point of view. He's both. But he stresses in all his work more the particularistic side than the universalistic side. And that is very rare, because usually when we see thinkers, politicians, rabbis, that stress the part of the particularistic Jewish identity, usually they don't go to become liberal Democrats. They are more nationalistic. They are more fundamentalistic. So that is an amazing thing. And a huge contribution of Rabbi Sachs, not only for Jewish scholarship, but Western liberal scholarship. And there, he is close to the communitarianism, but not all the communitarians, but to the sort of thinking, or the school of thinking, of liberal communitarian, which I'm also part of. Then you give the debate between, we saw in the first presentation, the huge debate between communitarians. There was a very important book, Communitarians versus Liberals, and then it was so certain, as usually people think, that liberalism is individualistic liberalism. But historically, it's not the case, because there were two strands of liberalism. There was the liberalism that started from the big three Johns. John Locke, in the 17th century, individual liberalism, and then it went to John Stuart Mill in the 19th century, and then it concludes in the thought, not only, but specifically, John Rawls in the 20th century. Wow. But against that strand of thinking, there was the Republican liberalism. that later on became the Communitarian liberalism. And in the past it started with Spinoza, went to Montesquieu, and later on to Alexis de Tocqueville in the 19th century. And today, communitarian liberals such as Charles Taylor, Michael Walters, some others, in part Michael Sandel, etc. So you don't have to be liberal individualistic. And Rabbi Sachs spoke specifically on communitarian in politics of hope, but it really is around all his work. He brings Judaism in not only because Judaism is so important to him, so dear to his heart, but because Judaism is the key example, according to Rabbi Sachs, of having a moral foundation of society and state that starts with Abraham when he goes out to Canaan. Particularism. After the days of Adam Rishon, and later on Noah, and the covenant of Noah, and the covenant later on of Abraham, and covenant is very important in Rabbi Sachs' thinking. He always speaks about covenantal society. He's not the only one. There were other people he was influenced from, like one of our professors, Professor Daniel Elazar, spoke a lot about it. And before there were other rabbis, Rabbi Yushenzlon and others. But he says that the covenant Judaism starts with the particularistic Judaism of language, of religion, of community. Religion is basically a community issue, but it can't be anti-universalistic. Here, he spoke before, but later on Michael Walzer, that Rabbi Sachs knew and speaks about and writes about. Michael Walzer, one of the key intellectuals and philosophers in liberal thought today, also in Jewish thought today. Michael Walzer spoke about thick and thin, that the way we should go to human rights is not like John Rawls and others, Dworkin and other basically universalistic abstract terms, but this will be only the thing, the first layer, basic human rights. But then there is the thick building, which is more particularistic, more communitarian from your own cultures. So Rabbi Sachs always speak that the uniqueness of Abraham tells the story of a nation who sees herself as unique, but if it sees itself as unique, it sees other nations as well as unique. And this is not a regular particularistic understanding that we really know. Because we really know that people tend to be more particularistic, they tend to be more chauvinistic, more against the other, sometimes racist. Okay, so that's quite important in his thought. I wanted to quote some quotes, I won't read quotes, but he starts always with the difference, and the dignity of being different. Here, he's closer to some postmodernist thought, especially to Richard Rorty. He's not like him, but in this specific point, because what Richard Rorty is, in my point of view, is the most important postmodernistic thinker, more than a French school, but I'm not totally objective here. So he starts his own understanding about human rights, not as in universal human rights as in Kant's, or even John Locke, natural rights, etc., but in the specificness of each person. And therefore you can't be racist against anybody. So it starts with the uniqueness. So here Rabbi Sachs is closer to him. Another intellectual who Rabbi Sachs was very influenced from was, of course, Yeshayahu Berlin. Yeshayahu Berlin, one of the key intellectuals in the liberal world, Jewish liberal intellectual. He always was the exception. And he's not postmodern. He inspired some of the postmodern. But he was a liberal modern thinker, modernist thinker. And Berlin said that usually we see the Enlightenment as a way towards liberalism, democracy, because of the universal understanding of human rights and thinking and rationalism, etc. But that was, some of it was totalitarianistic, because everything is according to one universal And here, just the other school, the Romanticism, says Berlin, the liberal Berlin, the Romanticism that speaks about the uniqueness of everyone, according to the English school of Romanticism, or the uniqueness of every nation, according to the German school of Romanticism, spoke about uniqueness. And Berlin says you can't go against the uniqueness of people. You can't try to have only one truth. And Rabbi Sachs was very influenced from this understanding of Berlin. They were close, and even was in his, he even spoke about him after his death. I'm finishing in half a minute. And he really tried to build something that combines universalistic and particularistic understanding. The last remark is this. The beginning of his work, when you look at his books at the beginning, he speaks mainly towards the Jewish people. About what happens after Holocaust, Orthodox Judaism against non-Orthodox Judaism, etc. Later on, he brings the same point, but speaks universally towards all the world. And he really relates to the most important problems that are facing people today. In the book about morality, for instance, he speaks about the problem of individualism, goes back to Tocqueville, the problem of individualism that make people be alone and more vulnerable. After us, later on, will come Professor Putnam, who spoke in his polling alone. I don't know whether he is here, but he spoke about the problem of losing the social capital, goes after Tocqueville as well. And it takes the same understanding and facing the problem of divorce, of violence, everything goes to the facing. The I, and not the we. And here again you see his communitarian understanding in his Jewish interpretation. Thank you very much.